Okay.
So I think I have it set so that you should be able to share screen, but if not, let me know and I'll.
Let me know if you can see the screen.
Yep, looks like it's working.
Great. So I'm just going to start this from the beginning. So some of you may or may not be aware, but over the last couple of years, I've been collecting what's called, well, I call it hair jewelry or mourning jewelry. I also, collect love tokens, and they call it sweetheart jewelry or trench art or a lot of different things. And I'll go into what they are. But at the end of the day, it's a, a lot of people say, well, that's kind of an, an odd collection of things to collect. I think especially the hair jewelry will maybe be a little off-putting, but we'll see. So let me just kind of go right into it. So hair jewelry, it's called sentimental jewelry. Again, most people think of it in terms of mourning jewelry that people wear to remember somebody who's passed, but it could also be things that were given just simply, to mark an occasion or to mark a passage. A lot of people who traveled would give these types of mementos, but where it really kind of came into its being was during the Victorian times, and I'll share a bit more of that. Love tokens, they've been around since the 15th century. I think a lot of people think of love tokens of what was happening in the world wars, what people were giving to their sweethearts, having to do with coins that were coins really in anything that they could get their hands on, as far as like artillery or anything that they had at the military. There weren't a lot of places to find items to bring home to family, so they kind of created art and remembrance pieces or gifts, if you will, with what they found. So just to point out the two things on the right, the top locket, and I thought this was really interesting. Most of the time people see hair that's braided in a locket. This is a Swiss locket, and it's made to look like wheat. So it's sort of like got bristles in a way that, I've never seen before. And so I thought that was really, really interesting. The bottom is a love token. It is a defaced coin. So this person decided, and again, we don't really know the backstory, so you can kind of read into it what you want, but when the site that I pulled this from, they thought, oh, it must be somebody who is a musician, those are the initials. They don't even know really the date for it. So I thought, but I really liked the imagery, and I thought that it was a really nice job, because some of them can be very primitive. So I think that a lot of people, would assume that, mourning jewelry, obviously, happened as a result of like a death, and that is true. I think that Queen Victoria is probably the prime example. When her husband passed, she went into, full-time mourning, and I know it's a period that never passed. This is some of the jewelry that was created. This is also mourning jewelry. It has nothing to do with hair, but the pearls represented, children and purity. So did white enameled jewelry. Pearls were very much a part of it. There also was something, some oak pieces, and they also used something that, sort of resembled a specialized kind of form of coal that they would put into these lockets, rings, and brooches. So, once the Queen sort of started this tradition, it kind of picked up. So this was really the heyday, or I should say the period of time when mourning jewelry really reached its sort of peak of popularity. As I mentioned before, vulcanite, white enamel, coal. They did use some turquoise, but again, each sort of they chose the materials carefully because they represented something. It wasn't just necessarily what was available, but it was also what it symbolized. Some of the earlier pieces of mourning jewelry had skulls and crossbones, sort of had a very memento mori sort of approach to it. These were much more kind and gentle pieces of wheat or lamb or flowers. So the brooch in the center is braided hair or basket weaved hair. It's got the black enamel, and it's got the gold around the ends. It was sometimes on the back of these would be engraved whose hair it was, sometimes not. Sorry, I'm going to move everybody for a minute. There was a book, and I put the reference here in case anybody was interested in and perhaps going and reading it. But hair is very, it's very personal to people, and it lasts beyond their physical presence. So for a lot of people, hair was more than just sort of an object. It was a way of keeping that person close and near even after they had died. And it became, it was these types of jewelry. There was a cost and expense to putting these together. And I'm just sort of flipping over to the next page so you can see all the different types of, displays of how people incorporated hair into some of their jewelry and some of their pieces. So, we've got here, this is a watch fob on the left, and you can see in the center of it, there's braided hair. But when it's closed and it's on a watch chain, again, it just looks to be just a your standard watch fob. And on the bottom of this one in particular, there is one of those sort of standard stone, either a bloodstone. I can't remember what the website said about what was the stone type, but it was a way of keeping somebody near. The second picture is actually a weaved bracelet made of hair. And can you all see this very well, or would you like me to try and make it a little larger?
Looks fine to me.
Looks good.
And this one, actually, I got to tell you, I'm very impressed with how well this has sort of survived. I mean, hair certainly can withstand a lot, but it does have a tendency to break and become brittle over time. So it just was a beautiful, to me, it's a very beautiful braided bracelet that just happens to be made out of hair. The locket in the center, again with the turquoise background, they created almost flourishes. It was not just sort of a as a remembrance of the person, but it actually kind of took on its own its own art piece. And if you can't really tell, but there is gold braided in there in the center that's kind of holding the hair pieces together, and there's some pearls. Again, we can be led to assume, was this a child, because it's pearls, and usually pearls represent youth. So it's again, you can kind of read into it, but that is, to me, that's a very striking piece. And you do find them occasionally, but more of them you're going to find more as like a braided or some type of weave pattern. The bracelet on the second to right, and you can't really tell here, but this is a very interesting one. It's hair from every single member of the family. And while they call it a mourning bracelet, the society really thought that this was created at a time when all of the family members were, alive and well. And on each one of those individual segments of hair, they have engraved the initials. So the initials are on the back of the brooch, or the back of the bracelet clasp. As you see, you probably can make them out just a little bit, but there's a C and an RP, and then it looks like an LEP. But they're also present on all of the individual strands that go down, so that they know which one contributed to which strand. It's really remarkable. And then I didn't put a picture of it in here, but on the very front of this brooch are swirls that also include all of the contributors who made up this bracelet. You know, obviously over time it became a mourning bracelet as those individual family members left, but it was men and women who contributed to the bracelet, which I thought was very interesting. And then on the very right, this is a ring, and you might at first not be able to tell where the hair is, but over on the very right, you can see where my pointer is, that's braided hair in the inset. So there's braided hair that actually is in the center of the ring. It's covered in a lot of places by the gold, but there is very intricately braided hair underneath, which I think is just, well, it's a beautiful ring. Here. You know, you begin to ask yourself, how are they coming across all this hair to produce all this jewelry? And the more important a person was, you know, for example, like if somebody who is royal passed away, like George III died, and he had a number of mourning rings made for his family. So at his death, and I think there were like 72 or 80. Well, there was just no way that amount of hair was going to be made into rings. So they have to supplement. And yet that seemed to be a topic that a lot of people didn't want to discuss. So I put in here some advertisements that used to run in the papers in London. And they really do make a point of saying, you know, this is actual, you know, the hair of the person who contributed. This is, you know, not, you know, coming from another source. The person who's the A4, F-O-R-R-E-R, that individual, and I've got a piece showing a little bit later on, he really was an incredible artist when it came to hair. And, you know, he liked to sit there and tell everybody that he was the hair jeweler to the queen. So these were, you know, very, you know, so, you know, it was a very, you know, a competitive time for hair jewelers, goldsmiths, you know, people who are taking hair and turning it into jewelry. But they did have to supplement. And there was a group of nuns who used to grow their hair and cut it off and supplement jewelry for families that needed more. So they kind of made that part of the income generating services of their group. What I liked so much about the piece on the right, and I included the whole sort of backstory. And again, you're going to see that jeweler, A4, is the one who created this. So this young girl passed away at the age of 16, and her hair was taken by her family to the jeweler. And he made, and I wish I could blow it up, but every time I do, it takes on, I just can't get the detail, but that clasp, that you know, bow is all made of her hair. And it's where you see it sort of, you know, it looks like you're looking through, you are actually looking through, the weave is really open. And to me, this is just an incredible, delicate piece of art. But I can also imagine that it was very, very important to her parents, to her mother, you know, as a way of keeping her with her. And it's just, to me, just a remarkable, you know, token of their daughter who continues to have sort of a presence in their lives, albeit just through her hair. But does anybody have any questions about what I've sort of shown so far?
Those pieces you've shown, are those pieces in your possession?
No, I've got some. I'll show you at the end the ones that I have in mind. you know, I wanted to show you what people consider, you know, the best pieces. So, you know, some of them are coming from museums like, this may have come from the Victoria and Albert Museum. I mean, they just, the English have a really wonderful set of examples. So I started with them, and then I'll show you mine at the end.
I imagine the prices are all over the board.
You mean for now?
Yeah.
You can find a lot of pieces. You can find them really at any type of, you know, I don't want to say like flea market, but craft fair and things like that. But, you know, whether or not they're truly as old as they're being advertised, it's a good question. Like in this case, you really do know this was in its original box. It had the names of the person that it was created for. You know, there's a lot that we know just from this photograph about this one, you know, pin. But that isn't always the case. And I'll show you some of mine, of which I do not know the history on, but I bought them because I just, they sort of resonated with me, either because I really thought that, you know, the design was something, you know, spectacular, or because of the message. There is, I have a ring in my collection that is, it's just very unusual. But like I said, hair is very, over time, it can get very brittle. So you'll notice that some of my pieces are beginning to show wear. So I have them usually in display cases where, you know, my pets and my family, you know, you can look at them, but you can't touch them. I'm just going to turn right over to love tokens, which to me, this is probably where I got my start. I love the idea of people making things themselves for people that they love. And this love token started out as people defacing, you know, they take a coin that could no longer be in circulation because it was bent or damaged, and then they would deface either one or both sides, and then they would inscribe a message. Most of the time it was initials, but it could also be a symbol, it could be a full name, it could be a date of an event. Usually they did not, a love token that had stones embedded in it was usually of more quality. That's usually what people who had a lot of money would do. But for the most part, this was sort of a more inexpensive way to honor somebody or remember somebody, or to give them a token of esteem. And I say that because even though back in the day when you saw some of the advertisements for the mourning jewelry, the hair jewelry, it doesn't look very expensive, but for the average person on the street, that could be very expensive, and they could have been priced out of it. But the love tokens could be carried on a, you know, in a pocket. It could be carried on a watch, like a watch fob, or attached to their watch fob. And it just was a wonderful way to, you know, remember somebody. It was interesting. There's also a portion, I didn't include it here, where some of the convicts who were being sent off to Australia were leaving love tokens for family members. And those are very interesting because they're very, some of them were very, very ornate. So that person had a real gift for creating art. And some of them were very primitive with just sort of tacked in initials because they didn't know how to do a better job at engraving. So, but that's what I really like about love tokens. They're all different. Most of them were produced by the individual themselves. So their creativity, what they might have been thinking at the time, it really reflects in the jewelry. So I'm really fascinated by these. The love token on the right was defaced on both sides, and they are again guessing because they don't really. Again, they can only look at the coin and try and make a a guesstimate about what's going on, but the fact that it has a full name and a date, they have assumed that this is a memorial to a death. But I think it's beautiful. I love the edging. I love the birds and the flowers. You know, I just think it's a phenomenal piece. The one at the bottom I included not because I like the design necessarily, but because of the fact that they've included the turquoise and the garnets and the pearls. You know, as a way of embellishing the flower that they put on the coin. Let's see. So I just put some more examples here of just different coins that got picked up over time and that people have put into various different museums. Again, it was unusual to have a full name, a location, dates. Most of the time it was like the one that was the second from the left that has engraved initials. And, you know, is that a JG or a GJ? I mean, it's, you know, people will debate about that, and this website has decided that it's a JG. But like the Annie Thompson, that was part of, you know, you can see that they actually bore holes on 3 different sides. So the question is, it could have been part of a bracelet. It also, you know, I didn't include any examples in this display, but they used to put love tokens on these very grand necklaces. So the coins would be part of maybe a row of coins that would go together into a point, almost like a, I'm trying to think what you would call that kind of necklace, but it would be covered in, you know, so the coin would be attached on various different sides to other coins. The one in the center is unusual in that, and you can't really tell, but there is a sailboat in the middle of that coin. It's just tiny, tiny. And I, you know, I love the way that they've tried to do perspective, and sometimes it fails. Like you know, they're trying to say that the boat is really far out to sea, and yet the reeds on the left, it's kind of like, okay, I could kind of make that out now that I know what they're trying to accomplish. But it just, to me, it's always interesting to see how people have tried to capture that mood. It probably represented somebody who was, you know, going off, maybe not to come back. You know, and it was just a way of sort of remembering that individual or that event. The second to the right, the fact that it's a gold coin is interesting, but they do reference here that it was for a golden anniversary gift. So that's probably why it was, you know, selected. But again, it has the dates, which is special, and along with the initials of the individuals who are celebrating that event. And then the one on the very right, and I love this one because it's got, there's a boat in there, you see a lighthouse and a house, and you see, you know, birds and a tree. I mean, to me, this really shows it's the creativity of the person who's designing it. I wish I kind of understood why it was created this way. What was the event that they were trying to memorialize, but just the fact that it was, think about the amount of time that it took to craft this. It just, it's in and of itself, it's a piece of art to me, but it also represented something more. And folks may or may not be familiar with the term trench art or sweetheart jewelry, but you know, soldiers have been creating things out of found items for a long, long time. And this is personal to me because the World War II sort of sweetheart jewelry is something that one of my great uncles, when he was recovering from injuries, made for his sisters and mom. And so I've got as part of my collection, one of the pieces that he made. And it's very special to me. And it means, you know, it has more than just sort of an allure of, you know, of my interest. It's very personal, but you'll notice that like with these types of coins, especially those early on, they would, from World War I, they would put like who, you know, from to, they usually put something on there like forget me not. And sometimes they'd put their division, like where they, who they were fighting with, maybe some of the dates that they were there, especially if it was like to commemorate a piece of a battle that was significant. It was also a way of sending home something that indicated that they were still alive and thinking of their family. One of the things they called it also too, as it says in the center, the Pacific War art. And they also use things like lucite from the windows of the airplanes. And in my example, my uncle is using lucite on one of the pieces that he gave to one of his sisters. So it's interesting. The piece at the bottom, the bracelet at the bottom, you'd look at this and go, this can't be a coin, but it is. They've completely defaced all of the coins, and it says here they're Australian. They were paid in Australian coins, and therefore felt, it was money, but it was they were using then the coins to create something with. But usually when you flip these bracelets over, the coin, the other side of the coin is visible. But I don't know how they achieved the beveling that they have on top of the whole coin. I can only imagine that it was some type of like a boring tool that just they tapped into, with great diligence throughout the whole piece. The bindings, the pieces that hold each coin together. In this case, it's more rough and ready. You'll notice in some that are in my collection, they've actually they've cut out like the shields or the crests from the various pieces of coin, and then they've created clasps holding the coins together from them, and they're very beautiful. I'll show you the one on the right. This is a, they said this was from the Philippines. This was from a D. Gallagher and wife from Ed Gallagher. So it could have been, maybe his brother and his wife, or it could have been a mother. But again, very different from the one on the left. But and it tells us what military unit he was in. And you can see that, the coin edge has not been altered. So you can definitely tell it's a coin. But it's just, I think this is a beautiful piece. This one is kind of unusual in that it has not been put into a piece of jewelry. So this was probably held in a pocket, just as like a good luck charm or some type of,
Susan, the coin bracelet has me thinking, remembering when I was a child, my father had a little box of World War II mementos, some of his patches from his uniform, and there was a couple pieces of jewelry in there, and there was this bracelet of coins, just like this, no leather, just had clasp on it. And I think some of them were actually left as the original coins and some were something else. But I don't know whatever happened to that. I don't know what it was, but I suspect it was something like this now that I look at it.
Oh, yeah. I think my uncle was very industrious. He had 8 sisters and he was just making jewelry. I mean, and it was, what's interesting is he was not married at the time that he went off. And so when his, all of his sisters have these wonderful pieces and his children had none. So when my cousin came to visit, my mother actually gave my cousin the bracelet that he made for my grandmother. And I have my great aunt and uncles. So, but they mean a lot, especially when really the history behind it. And in our case, he incorporated their photographs into the jewelry. So we absolutely sort of knew, who he was making it for and when, because the jewelry was, sort of a snapshot, if you will, of the time. So I've got some, I'll show you in just a second, but I just wanted to, so, you were talking about the jewelry, all the different coins and being able to see the coin faces. So the one on the right, you actually see the coins, and what they did was they sort of popped them up. They they created, instead of leaving the coin flat, they created more of a dome. And that was very much something that people liked to do. They would also see how they would make sort of one of those centerpieces and then use graduating sized coins to go down. I think people were very, very creative when it came to how they liked to, make these pieces. So the little singular coin on the left, it says, "To my wife, love, Bill." And he's in New Guinea in 19, I think that's 44. It, to me, that's, and you can tell it's clasped into probably a bracelet, which I think is lovely. And the one sort of in the middle, which says "Love from Ted," that's in the lucite that they were talking about, that they were pulling off of the, downed or broken aircraft, and they were using it to encase either the coin or to put it on top of a photograph to protect it. So to me, this is just, creativity, was, they could do anything and did. You'll notice the different clasps. There's this one right here at the very top left. Again, this was where they cut out, see the clasps that are connecting the coins. That person used other coins and cut the shields out, and they became the clasps. And then they used some type of soldering where it kind of snaps in. Now, most of them were not that sophisticated. Most of them either looked like that had sort of one of these hook clasps, or I have one in my collection where a coin was actually bent in half and kind of created a hook itself, and then another coin was kind of cut in half, and then there's an opening where the coin holds together. Now, it doesn't stay on your wrist very well, but it was very, it was very creative the way they kind of came up with that clasping mechanism to close the bracelet. And you'll notice that I couldn't, there's not a really good picture here, but the upper picture with the bracelet that's 3 down, that center coin has been defaced and they have etched something into it, but I cannot make out, no matter how much I sort of blow up the photo, to see what was said. But I'm assuming it's a similar message to what's kind of engraved on these centerpieces. But I think they're all different. So this is my collection, and I just the object on the left is a watch fob, and the hair is pristine. It was probably never used. Don't know why. I don't have any of the provenance or understanding of who it was made for, why it wasn't used, but this is all braided, weaved hair. And I have to imagine that the hair had to be supplemented. I just can't imagine that one person was able to give this much hair to get this accomplished. So it probably, again, not something that was completely from the donor. In the center, and I tried to take 2 pictures of it, this is a ring, and the hair is exposed all the way around. The engraving on the inside says "Mother's hair." I don't know who Mother is, but it says "Mother's hair," and there's a little heart on the outside, which I think is just a really sweet, very gentle expression, kind of covering that top of the hair, but you can kind of see that the hair is beginning to fray a little bit on the left. From the back side, you see that it's, woven in probably, well, there's at least, I'm seeing 4 strands of hair that are kind of around the base or the center of the ring. And then I wanted to show a piece where the hair is just naturally put into the brooch. This was just, they basically probably took a cutting, Again, don't know if it was just a memorial to a loved one who passed. The hair is not light, like white or gray. So, you can assume it was not somebody who was, had reached a great age. It could also be, some type of a sweetheart, just keeping a cut of hair from somebody who went off to war or went off and maybe never returned. Again, don't know the backstory, but it's a beautiful little piece. I love being able to see the hair in kind of a natural state. It hasn't been altered or braided. It just has been gently sort of placed and swirled in the brooch itself. Let's see. And then here's a collection. I pulled out just one of the boxes that I have with the jewelry. The photo on the left, you'll see the second one down. There's a photograph, and that's my great aunt and uncle. That my younger uncle. Let's just see if I can make it bigger. Let's see. No, let me go back. Oh, there it is. This is my aunt and my uncle. You can tell that this is the back of the bracelet. So he intended for my Aunt Aude to wear the photo closest to her wrist, sort of keeping it close. And then just having and on the other side is just really just a coin face. But you'll see that he used the shields. He made the shields, and you can see how he cut the coins to make these shapes. So he wanted something a little bit different. Then for my grandmother, not only did he make her a bracelet, but he also did this. This is my mother over here in the left-hand side in a little, I can only assume that this was supposed to be like held in a pocket or held in a purse, or, it was never intended to be worn because there's no clasp, there's nothing. And it's not even, you can't even make out that it was maybe even attached to a coin, but it's my mother and her sister. And again, I think was the idea that my grandmother would carry that in her handbag or in a some place that was close to her heart, that of my mom and her sister. The coin at the bottom, I didn't really talk about this, but they also did a lot of these types of activities where they cut out the figure in the coin. They would either cut it out or push it forward. And this was one that had been in my family. It may have been one that my great uncle also took care of, but I don't know that for a fact. But I think it's fascinating, and I've really never seen many like it. The other coins sort of around these singular coins, these are all love tokens that I picked up over time. You can see the one that says Sally. This was probably more, there's a lighthouse in it. Again, I've seen this theme before, so to me, it tends to mean, for me, that somebody was traveling or going someplace, and again, it was supposed to be a forget-me-not type of a gift. You see a lot of initials that are coming up. This bracelet right here, on the right-hand side in the lower right, those are all initials, and it's likely an entire family, and they just they created an initial of each family member, and then they put it on to either, I think in this case these are all bracelets, but let me go back one. Yeah, these are all bracelets, but you see here, I wanted to show a close-up of this one where you see it looks to me, when you just look very quickly, it looks like a fish that's holding the coins together, but it's actually, got the eagle and on top of a crest. So it's, again, they cut it out of the coin itself, but much like this coin on the right, the large right. So just really a very personal. I like the personality of each one of them. And then I just, the last thing right here is, this is a Victorian, early Victorian hairpiece that's they made into like a serpent pin. It's got two probably garnets, one on the head and one at the tail. But I thought, God, that is just such a beautiful piece. Again, I don't think it's ever been used because the hair is pristine. But anyway, I just sort of, these are some of the websites that I went to pull some of the earlier pictures. So any questions? Happy to go back and show some.
Did this evolve into the charm bracelets that are more common today? Getting a charm from a city that you've been to, or all of your children represented by a commercial charm?
I would think it, to me, that seems like the natural evolution of this. I mean, each one of these coins, and I'll go back, I mean, this represented a huge amount of work by the individual who did it. Not to say that I don't think people could go and buy one, but the ones that are here really strike me as, for the most part, being made by, created by the giver,
Mm-hmm.
the recipient. But when it came time, I mean, that took a great deal of time to accomplish. And I think, one of the reasons why there was a proliferation of these sweetheart bracelets and pieces during the wars was you had a lot of people sitting and waiting, either recovering or waiting for deployment. So they had some time on their hands that they could really focus in on something, take their mind off of maybe something that was imminent or something that had happened. And it also let them focus on something that was happier, thinking about, happier times, happier events. So, as we got into more, commercial applications of jewelry, where it wasn't necessarily something that we individually would create and give, to me, makes perfect sense that the charm bracelet then, that was the 1950s, that really picked up
Yes.
then. And so, yeah, because, my mother has a beautiful charm. I love charm bracelets too. So maybe the topic for another talk.
Well, it certainly, because of the time period, it certainly reflects the fact that, nowadays we have cell phones, and people who are far, far away can stay in touch and talk and see each other all the time. And that wasn't available then. This was a substitute, the best you could have to have that connection with somebody who was far away or in the war. And you didn't know what was happening with them or what was going to happen with them. So, and of course, the whole Victorian sort of mourning, Victorians had a very sort of dark view of death. Coming out of that, as photography developed, there's a whole genre of photographs of the dead.
Yeah.
Dead family members with living family members posed with them, which strikes us today as sort of bizarre, but it was a way of remembering them because especially if it was an infant or a small child, you didn't have a lot of photographs of them. You had to go to a photographer to get a photo made. And so that was their way of trying to remember that person using whatever the latest technology of the day would be.
Yeah. No, you bring up a good point. I mean, some of those photographs, to an untrained eye, you might just think, because they used to get very creative about, making them look kind of as lifelike as they can. But once you sort of see once you know what you're looking for in some of those photographs, it is very interesting. I love, you bring up another piece. I mean, I find those photographs fascinating, but I also like the ones where because cameras took a long time to take a photograph, and they'd have a small infant, and they'd put the mother in the chair, cover her in her sheet, and she would hold onto the child. So she'd be under the sheet, but they just wanted a photo of the child. So,
Yeah. I see a hand up.
yes.
Sarah.
Yeah, I hope you can see this. This is a watch fob like the one that was shown. It belonged to my grandfather. It has the 3 kinds of hair weaving, the same as Susan's. And the pendant is a laughing face with a diamond in its mouth. I have to clean it fairly often to get the diamond to be a diamond. It something behind it tarnishes, but I don't know if it was his mother's hair or his wife's hair, or as Susan says, maybe you have to get somebody else's hair. But I do remember that my mother's family, I have a china dresser set that used to include a hair pot.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a little pot with a hole in the lid. And when you cleaned your hairbrushes, you put the hair into the hair pot. And presumably it was for making watch fobs like this.
Susan, if you don't need the slideshow, then I think everybody's, we might get a better view of Sarah's piece. Yeah.
Around, that's wrong way around.
And
No.
maybe I can set this so that the speaker.
It's going to disappear if I bring it too much closer, given the way Zoom does with backgrounds.
Yeah, part of it disappears. But yeah,
Right. If I put it on me, then it won't disappear exactly.
right.
It's almost long enough to be a necklace. I have a photograph of my, a picture of my grandfather wearing it. It's not a portrait, it's just a snapshot.
Mhm.
But he had it across his vest, so I know it belonged to him.
Mm.
And
Oh,
it
and that's, the fact that you have a photograph of the piece on a family member is huge, because you've got now, this so much more of the story than a lot of people. If you can put a family photograph or a photograph of the object that you've got. I have a cousin who is fascinated by the family photographs and jewelry. And she's constantly looking in the photographs, trying to identify, oh, looks like great so-and-so is wearing this, that, and the other. So it's a, I think that's just a wonderful, wonderful piece that you have. Not only the fact that it's a beautiful, and I love the fact that you're wearing it as a necklace.
Well, it doesn't quite make it, but my neck's bigger than a watch fob needs to be, but I could hook it up with something, except as you say, the hair is really fragile, and I'm sure it hasn't been worn in over 100 years. It's just been in its box. I still have the box it came in, so it's lined with blue velvet.
Yeah. Oh, that's
But
wonderful.
I could actually take a picture of it with a picture of him and send it to the Park Society if that's of any interest.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, that I would think that would be wonderful.
For the archives that don't need more stuff.
Well, if you can send those to me, and we might do a little article in the next newsletter about Susan's presentation, and could include those. So if you get
Well,
around.
this is the same guy that you said might be featured in the newsletter because he was in a dust up in the Tabor Theater in Denver and was arrested for a fist fight, and it appeared in a newspaper in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Sounds like an interesting character.
Multiple sides of the same guy.
I see a hand up there for Tad.
It's one of the things that I think I mentioned in the last newsletter, is that people 50 years from now doing genealogy, for those of us who are no longer with these, here on Earth, there's a lot of things that are missing, that there's not, we do things by email, by text messages, using various social apps, and then it's gone. And so, for example, I have my grandmother's letters between her and her oldest son, who was an officer in Europe in the Second World War. And they're fascinating to read. And you try to get them, so you're reading the response from, from one to the other. And it gives you a feel for the people. And that's, I remember when I attended the funeral, when I flew home from it, I had one of the folders out and I was reading the letters and I was starting to laugh, and people were looking at me. I said, well, I just found out what my grandmother called my grandfather, and it wasn't exactly nice, and and that's it. We've lost those things. I have, stuff that we hand down in the family. I have a oval marble top table, a parlor table that's in beautiful shape. It's been restored. The marble is the original marble. And, when I had it done, it came from the Page estate over in Massachusetts. And when I had it done, I asked the guy asked me, he said, well, how old do you think this is? And I thought, well, it's probably 1890s. He said, no, this is carved black walnut. This is more pre-Civil War. And it was like, wow, but the trouble is, where does it go from here? I have it, I value it. I have my great-grandfather's violin in playable condition. I have a music box that belonged to my great-grandmother that almost became a sewing box. And I have a marble top washstand. And the best one, which needs restoration, I have a pier mirror that used to be in my grandmother's living room for ages. And nobody else in the family wanted it because they had no place to put the sucker, and the question is, where does it go? All these things that we've handed down, sometimes you find somebody who likes it. My grandmother had a watch that had been given to her by a suitor that it didn't come out, but he liked her so much, he gave her this watch. It was a little watch with a little chain that she could wear. And that went to my older sister. And she loves it because it's something from the family that is traditional and, very, it's a memory thing. And that's, I have one of the kerosene lamps that my grandmother got at her wedding in 1912. They also used to, back in those days, in the early 20th century, one of the wedding gifts that most people would give would be some sort of sterling silver, piece, like a pickle fork or, a ice tong type of thing, and I have several of those, and, just who do I give them to?
Well, ask around, and if you find somebody, make sure it's in a will, very specific. I mean, I only have a couple of family pieces that I want to continue on, and I've put them in a will. The rest of the stuff, I don't care. Cindy.
I've had the joy of inheriting a large chest that belonged to my grandmother. And recently going through it in more detail, I had looked at so much and then life went on. And so I started looking at some things in detail. And her father, my great-grandfather, died in her house. And I realized that the wallet in front of me as I went through was his. And as I kept taking the pieces out and seeing that some of them were very recent from the days of his, close to his death. Others he'd carried for years. And I found a handkerchief just very neatly wrapped up. And when I unfolded it, it belonged to his wife, my great-grandmother, who had died 25 years previous to him. And he'd carried it in this wallet for all those years, and it was long. And when I held it up, we realized it could have been mine, totally in the coloring and everything. And that was a very eerie closeness. Talk about being close to somebody, to realize the love there, that he carried this for so long, and then to have it be so genetically close.
Speaking of that, in a way, I'm going to try to bring it in, but DNA, in a way, our DNA, having it tested and banked in a our project or whatever, is a way of preserving, our us and the people that went before us, the same as hair or some other artifact. Sometimes we don't always think of it that way, but I have my dad's, my uncles and cousins and the DNA in there, and that's them as much as anything else.
And will be there and useful when the science of genetics can go further than it does now.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Dan Parke's cousin, your uncle's your tests came in and they're waiting for the manual review. They've named the shared private variants, so they're SNPs, but they haven't gotten the updated information on when that occurred and putting dates on it. But that should come in a week or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I thought you were gonna fuss at me for being late.
No. No.
Interesting. John Allen Parke died at age 42 of whatever, irritation of the bowel, probably cancer. And his wife put his beard clippings and trimmings into a box, which I have,
Mm-hmm.
with dried flowers and with his ivory cigarette holder, because one of his careers was as a tobacconist.
Mm.
And he had a carved ivory cigarette holder that's very tobacco stained. And I have those trimmings in a little box.
Well, I don't know how sophisticated it is at the moment, but there is a company that says, and they're still developing the technology of being able to retrieve DNA from artifacts. And the last I saw, previously, it used to be if the hair didn't, if you'd saved hair, if it didn't have the root, you couldn't extract any DNA. But they say apparently they have been able to do so from hair without the root now.
Well, we've got him going back to Roger anyway, so
Yeah.
I don't need to send it in.
But it's amazing how that technology is coming along, and because that's always the the case in a lot of brick walls and things. You don't have a living descendant to test, and that might be a way to get some DNA on those people.
Yeah.
On another slight tangent, we've been redoing our guest bath, and the attic space over it, we had to pull a bunch of junk out of there so that we could get up there and do some fan work and things. And one of the things was a little larger than a shoebox size of a plastic, storage container. And it was all photos from John's family. I have a feeling it's when his father sold the house and moved up to the mountains. So it's been 10, 11 years or so. And John had no memory of when he got it or anything, but I started looking through there, and there are a number of old photographs from the 19th century, you can tell, and they're not identified. And there's, now that his father's gone, he has two older sisters who are unfortunately, not mentally all there anymore. So I don't know that there's anyone alive now who could identify them. That's a shame. It's really.
Yeah, same thing happened to us with my aunt before she passed away. We knew she had a bunch of old photos, and we started asking her where they were, and she pointed us to a box under the bed. The only box under the bed it had fairly recent photos, but not old ones. And we knew she had more, but yeah, she just didn't know where they were. And sure enough, about the next day after she passed away, we found the box.
Yeah.
And nothing was labeled.
Yeah.
Suzanne, thank you for putting the time and energy into creating the presentation.
Yes.
Need to do it.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Sorry I missed the first part.
Well,
I have a couple of the coin things. They're so small. They're
Let me-
dimes.
let me put it on speaker view, and then I think there you go.
It's the cutout.
It's cut out, yeah, like that, yeah.
They're cut out. They were earrings, but the part that you could put them on your ear has long since come off.
Can you
But
hold them up higher?
higher.
There they are. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going the wrong way here. I'm not good at this reverse stuff.
Cool. Yeah. I can't imagine the
I
degree
can't imagine cutting out that
Yeah,
dot like that.
getting it
And
just
this-
right and not
and
having
they're
holding
paper
collapse.
thin.
Yeah.
They're just so thin that it's,
The skill that is demonstrated in those coins where they cut things out, just, we don't give enough credit to some of our forebears for the talent they had that is just probably not terribly not existent today. I mean, I wonder if anyone does anything like that anymore.
Well,
do.
part of it too was they had time. They weren't sitting in front of a television or or their
Looking at
iPhone,
Facebook.
things like that. So on those long, especially winter evenings when you're sitting around the fire in the parlor, it was something to do. Yeah.
But it took a lot of skill. I was
Oh yeah.
very technically, amazing, so.
Well, I'm always amazed, and he was just typical of all of our ancestors who lived, in the 19th century, early 20th century. My great grandfather, who raised my dad, he's born in 1864. I mean, he was a blacksmith, he was a beekeeper, he was a farmer. It's like the number of skills that they had, which they had to have. But they were, certainly jacks of all trade by necessity, because you couldn't, just run out and hire somebody to do one specific thing a lot of times. And the same with the women, cooking, sewing, crafts, childcare, farming. A lot of women, people don't often realize how much of the farm work was done by the women. Not just tending animals, but working in the fields a lot of times.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've all gotten to be a bunch of softies, Yeah. Blame it on technology. Blame it on the iPhone or whatever. Well, Susan, that was wonderful. Does anybody else have anything on this topic or anything else? A question or a comment or? Well, I was speaking with Gary, who looks like he left us earlier, and maybe he and I need to talk about this, but I think maybe at another meeting, or certainly at the September meeting, I think it's a good agenda item. In terms of the DNA project, now that we're sort of becoming more familiar with the SNP testing, we talked about the big Y700 a few months ago. I think we need to try to find a way on a more organized basis to upgrade as many tests in our project as we can, because there are so many groups that could benefit. And as Gary had pointed out, especially there's a couple of large groups associated with some of the major immigrant lines, like the Robert, Thomas of Virginia, Roger, the lineage key Z, which is a park down in West Virginia, but they all have a fair number of participants and a lot of fragment lines associated with them. And the SNP testing is the way to figure out a lot of that, because prior we had to sort of compare where this fragment line's earliest known ancestor was at the time of their birth and see who genetically was in the area to match them up. With enough SNP testing, you could almost narrow down to, who it could be, or certainly on a very fine branch of a family. So I think that's something we need to start focusing on going forward. I just throw it out, but we'll talk about it more, I think, certainly in September. So anything else? Well, everybody, wherever you are, stay cool, stay safe from whatever natural disasters may come your way these days. And it's horrifying to think we've been to Hawaii and Maui and Lahaina, and it just I think the death toll's over 80 now, and they haven't really been able to get in to really search a lot of those buildings. So it's nasty stuff.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next month with a brand new show. And then don't forget our Park Society annual meetings are coming up later in September. So
Thank you for organizing it.
Yep, thanks, Ken.
sure
Thank you.
thing.
Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, good seeing
Yep,
everybody.
thanks, Susan.
And thanks, Susan. Yep, thanks.
Susan.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
care.
Bye.
Stay cool.